Hi and welcome back to Free Science Lessons. By the end of this video, you should be able to describe what's meant by the independent variable, the dependent variable, and control variables. This is part of the working scientifically aspect of the GCSE specification. Working scientifically is common to biology, chemistry, and physics, and frequently comes up in exams. Okay, now in your GCSE Science lessons, you'll carry out a range of practical work, and many of these are required practicals. And I should point out that all of the required practicals are covered in my videos. I'm showing you an example of a required practical here. This is a physics required practical. In this practical, we're investigating how the extension of a spring is affected by the force applied to the spring. We take a spring with no force applied and measure the position of the pointer on the meter ruler. This is called the unstretched position. We then apply a force of 1 Newton by attaching a weight to the bottom of the spring, and we measure the new position of the pointer on the ruler. How much the spring increases in length is called the extension, and we always measure the extension from the unstretched position. We now increase the force to 2 newtons by adding more weight, and measure the extension again, and we keep increasing the force and measuring the extension. Now in any investigation we have 3 key variables. These are the independent variable, the dependent variable, and the control variables. The independent variable is the variable which is changed by the investigator. In other words, the investigator selects the values for the independent variable. In this experiment, we're changing the size of the force applied to the spring. Another way of saying this is the weight applied to the spring. So in this case, the size of the force or weight is the independent variable. The dependent variable is the variable which we measure for every change in the independent variable. In this investigation, we're measuring the extension of the spring. So in this case, the extension of the spring is the dependent variable. Control variables are variables which we keep the same throughout the investigation, and it's very important that you learn the reason why. If we do not keep control variables the same, then we cannot be certain that any changes in the dependent variable are caused only by changes in the independent variable. In this investigation, there are 3 main control variables. Firstly, we need to make sure that we use the same spring for each experiment. Different springs could produce a different extension for the same force. Secondly, we need to make sure that our pointer is horizontal to the meter ruler. If we allow the pointer to point up or down, then we'll read the extension incorrectly. And lastly, we need to make certain that the meter ruler is vertical. Again, if the meter ruler leans to the left or right, then we'll read the extension incorrectly. So these are the 3 main control variables in this investigation. Now sometimes there may be a control variable that is difficult to keep the same. For example, in some investigations, the temperature of the room could be a control variable. However, we cannot easily keep the temperature of the room the same. So in this case, we need to monitor the temperature of the room with a thermometer to check that it does not change. Okay, now I just want to make a couple of final points. Almost all required practicals will have an independent variable, a dependent variable, and control variables. However, some required practicals do not. A good example is the microscopy required practical in biology. Secondly, if you're asked to describe a required practical in your exam, then make sure that you identify the independent and dependent variables, and describe what you will do to keep the control variables the same. Okay, so hopefully now you can describe what's meant by the independent variable, the dependent variable, and control variables.